All right, what's going on, everybody? And welcome to the second installment of Doc and Caveman's annual NBA. I lost my wording there. NBA draft prospect profiles. Today we're going to be focusing on Jabari Smith. You're with Dr. Fantasy here, and as always, the Fantasy Caveman. So Jabari Smith, 6'10 freshman from the University of Auburn, 220 pounds. As a freshman, he averaged nearly 17 points, 7.5 rebounds, a very impressive 42% from three, which is even more impressive when you look at the fact that he had 5.5 attempts per game. He's a very exciting young prospect. Caveman, I know this is one of your boys, so I'm just going to sit here, drink some water, and you have
Drink some
yourself a
water.
good time.
Okay. All right. I mean, there's a lot to like about him. You already mentioned I love the offense. I love the three ball. And I mean that doesn't. When's the last time you've seen a big shoot this well from three with as many attempts as he was taking? I mean, he was taking almost 6 attempts a game. And we were just talking about during our last one. We were talking about Chet, but Chet was only at about 4 attempts a game with his 39%. So, I mean, that's pretty. I mean, that's pretty impressive to be shooting that high of a percentage on that many attempts. I mean, as well as he makes a lot of tough contested shots as well. That's another area. I mean, in the NBA, you're gonna. It seems like almost a lot of possessions are gonna end in a tough contested shot, and if he has the ability to be that guy where you just give the ball to, and just okay, get us a tough bucket, and he's gonna be able to do that for you. And then the one thing I know you appreciate about him, he is an excellent defender, and especially on the perimeter. You've seen him at his size. Uh, he is not going to be an easy blow by for a lot of one. If he ends up having to go against some ones and twos, like it's not going to be a simple as just blowing by him. He has a lot of ability to stay in front of guys on the perimeter, and he's really good at closeouts. You see a lot of guys, big men at his size, can get a little bit sloppy when it comes to closing out and just defensively on the perimeter. We just talked about Chet not being, the greatest on the perimeter. Uh, Jabari Smith is the complete opposite of that. He's the best defensive big on the perimeter that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, and I honestly don't have much to clean up there. I mean, he's a pretty well-rounded prospect. He's got a good mid-range game. He's got a smooth three-point stroke. You mentioned the defensive versatility. I mean, he's really well-rounded. I don't know. He's one of those guys that when I look at his strengths and weaknesses, when you're picking out his weaknesses, I think they're being a little nitpicky. And I think he's got one of the reasons that I think it depends who ends up with the number one overall pick. But one of the reasons I think that he's going to go really high is you could argue he has the safest floor in this entire class. And we could sit here and debate all day. Is he going to be a superstar? Which I don't know, but if you're guaranteed to get a guy that's going to make a few all-star teams and be a very valuable, maybe like third best player, and I'll talk about that with a few of the comparisons I have, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing at all. So, yeah, I mean, I literally had all the same things: perimeter, defense, mid-range / three-point shooting, versatility, making tough shots. And he's kind of a modern NBA player. I mean, he's going to play all over. We'll go into, I guess, some of the weaknesses that I had. I think a lot of what people say his potential hinges on is how creative he gets offensively. Right now,
Yeah.
he's a great shooter. He's able to get to the basket, but I don't think in the most effective way always. So
Yeah.
I think that's really, if
Yeah.
he's able to work on driving to the basket and working on his post moves, I think that's really what's going to make him, a few-time All-Star versus superstar. But there's no doubt in my mind that his floor is safe. He's also not a great decision maker, not a great passer. I don't think that's going to be a part of his game. I think he's going to be more of an off-the-ball kind of player. But once again,
Mhm.
people list things like that as a weakness, but you can't have 20 ball handlers on your team. I mean, that's just not how this works. You have to have some guys that really thrive playing off the ball, and I think that's where he's going to come
Mhm.
into play.
Yeah, and the piggyback off that, when it comes to weaknesses, you really got to look at like, okay, how are they used in college? And his role at Auburn was definitely not to be a ball handler and a shot creator. He was not asked to do it, so that just never really became part of his game. You mentioned, yes, the finishing around the basket uh, is a bit of a concern. He shot just 52% around the basket, which, to put it lightly, is not very good. That's that's actually it's actually pretty bad. Uh, but I think I think that's definitely the reason why I love him so much, and what makes me love a lot of guys is, okay, how correctable are their weaknesses? Is it something that you can easily work on and become better, and so it's no longer a weakness? And what kind of weaknesses, or just something that he's gonna end up having to struggle with. Finishing around the basket, I think he can work on some kind of moves and kind of find ways to get himself open under the basket. I think that's a part of his game that it's gonna take a lot of work, but I definitely think that's something he could work on, and so where to the point where it's not really a weakness anymore.
Yeah, and probably he can. And I think that's really what's going to determine his upside. So, let's see what is next. Ideal fit. So yeah, we talked a little bit that this is going to be a guy that goes towards the top of the draft. I'd say top four. I don't know. There's four guys that I think you could really argue could be the number one pick in this year's draft. So I think it's really dependent on who ends up getting the pick. I mean, I'm probably gonna just list the Thunder for all of these top guys, except probably not Jaden Ivey, but because I don't think that's necessarily a need for them. But I mean, why not? He's got enough offensive upside. I guess he could be a fit there too. But um, the Thunder definitely need a little bit of polishing in their front court. I actually like the Houston fit quite a bit because I think that he has enough versatility. They are terrible defensively, so I think he could help out a ton there, similar to Chat. But he's the kind of guy that I think he could play that 3-4. And we mentioned with a guy like Chat, like, okay, who's going to the bench? Is it going to be Sangoon or what's going on with Wood? But I think that he could fit alongside anyone because I think you could put him at the 3 alongside those guys, and he could be a pretty versatile player for him. So I kind of like the Houston fit as the number one personally.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned with the Thunder. I mean, anybody's a good fit with the Thunder. I'm sure they could draft Jaden Ivey and find a way for to make it work, even though they have 95 guards on their team. But uh, and it does seem like something the Thunder would do. Uh, but yeah, you mentioned Houston. I like it. I like the Houston idea. The Blazers are another team. Uh, they really especially now that CJ McCollum is no longer there. It's been a bit of a struggle for them to find a consistent offensive force. especially with Damian Lillard missed most of last year. So to find a guy with Damian Lillard back and healthy, to find a guy that he can dish to, and he can get him buckets or for the Blazers. I just like the Blazers and they don't really have. I mean, they have Nurkic, but do they have another big?
Not really.
So I think he'd be a great fit alongside Nurkic in that front court as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the Blazers too are one of those teams. I think they have quite a few areas of need too.
Mm-hmm.
They have Damian Lillard and players.
They have Simon or whatever
Simons, yeah,
outside.
Anthony.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even actually, one of my boys from last year's class, Keon Johnson, played really freaking well at the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
He was getting consistent minutes for them, and he looked really good, actually. So I'm encouraged by that, and we'll see. He was a very raw prospect heading into last year, but I was very encouraged by what I saw at the end of last year. He averaged 15 points over the last month of the season, so I think there could be something there. But yeah, I mean, that's a team. I mean, they could probably use really anybody too. So yeah, that's a nice fit. And it depends on where they land. I think their odds right now are 7th best. So I think they're projected to finish 7th. But yeah, I mean, that's why they have the lottery. So you don't really know.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go over to some NBA comparisons. I'm very intrigued to see what you have here.
Okay. The two names I come up with, one, I mean, now the one name I have is LaMarcus Aldridge, but
Yeah.
not this version of LaMarcus Aldridge. His like prime when he was with San Antonio, that LaMarcus, not this one. But LaMarcus was never as good of a shooter as I don't think LaMarcus Aldridge was ever the knockdown shooter that Smith is. But I just like a lot of Marcus Aldridge early on in like his Spurs days, he was a very capable defender. In my opinion, just LaMarcus Aldridge always seemed to be one of the guy for the Spurs where you're like, okay, go get us a bucket. The Spurs in recent memory have not had that many of those guys.
Hey, watch it.
Where you the last guy they had that could truly do that might have been LaMarcus Aldridge. But I'm not wrong. But yeah, I mean, I like the LaMarcus Aldridge comparison. I also don't know, another name that I really came across that I was digging was Rashard Lewis. Rashard Lewis, I mean, very similar games. I honestly, the Rashard Lewis was a very capable, kind of like three and D guy on, especially on the perimeter. He did it for a long time at a very solid level. I think Rashard Lewis is kind of like his floor. And when you're talking about a Rashard Lewis as a floor, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and Rashard Lewis is actually kind of underrated in my opinion. And I mentioned in the beginning where he was a little his floor is safe as a few-time All-Star. Rashard Lewis was a 2-time All-Star. He had 7 seasons where he averaged over 17 points a game.
Yeah.
So he had himself a very nice career.
Sounds like something that is easily attainable for Smith.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that is very realistic for him. The other floor that I had for him too is Tobias Harris, and Tobias Harris is only 2. They're almost the same weight. Tobias Harris is 2 inches shorter, so I mean you can't get much closer. But he's not necessarily known as a big, but I'm also not sure if I consider Jabari to be a big necessarily. I don't know. I think that he's going to end up playing more of like that combo 3-4 forward type role more so, which is kind of what Tobias Harris. And that's what I meant with his floors. I see Jabari Smith, unless he really refines his offensive game, being the kind of guy that no matter what team he goes to, he's the third best player on the team. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just not sure if he's the kind of guy that's going to elevate your franchise. And I think that's what people are looking for in the first few picks. So that's the only thing that Yeah, that's why I personally, if I had my big board and I'm one of these top teams, I mean, these top teams stink. They need superstar potential. That's why a guy, maybe the Blazers make sense because they have an established superstar and Jabari doesn't have to step in and elevate the entire franchise. He can be more of a role player because I just, in my opinion, think he's a high level role player. And I think at the end of it, we'll look at it and he'll have the Tobias Harris kind of career. And there's nothing wrong with that. When I think about Tobias Harris, everywhere he goes, he's the third best player on the team. And there's nothing wrong with that. He's an elite defender. He defends all positions well. Year in and year out, he's usually, in the top 20 or so in 3-point percentage. Yeah. So I think it's a pretty fair comparison. I didn't see it anywhere, but that's my comparison.
That's not, I mean, it's not a horrible comparison, but I think, like you said, a lot of how he projects at the next level, it's gonna come down to what can he do to improve his game around the basket and just driving and like attacking the basket. What does he do in that part of his game? Because if he adds to that, and if that somehow becomes a strength of his, where he's able to, because he has the frame to really go down there and bang around with a lot of guys. If he's able to refine his game around the basket, we're looking at a guy that's probably going to make several All-NBA teams. I mean he has that kind of upside if he can, and I think he has potential to probably be the second best player on a championship team. If he's able to work on that. It all hinges about how he improves his game around the basket, because we know his other attributes and his other abilities are really going to make him. He's one of those. He's not going to fade away. He's not going to be a guy that is going to be riding the back end of a crappy team's bench or anything like that.
No, it's an interesting thing to think about in general is I'm thinking of the top few prospects here. Do you think that any of them have the potential to be the number one player on a championship team?
I mean, if you...
Like, I like this class, and I think there's a lot of talent, and it's not a knock, but, is there that... I have one player in mind, which I think is why he's flying up boards, but I don't know if any of these guys I'm confident saying 100% they could be a top player.
We're talking about. I just got done talking about the upside of Jabari Smith, and if he improves his game around the basket. But even if he does that, even I don't see him becoming a number one option on a champion. That's not a knock against him. It's just that I don't know if any of these guys have it. Something about, you have to have the it factor to become a number one guy. And I don't think, I honestly don't think I see that in this draft.
Yeah, so it's one of those where maybe it's not necessarily a bad thing that he has a safe floor, which I think is kind of the whole point, that he could end up going number one potentially. He's in the mix there.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think that's it for Jabari Smith here. Next episode, I have Paulo down, Banchero, so we'll be talking about him next. So make sure you guys tune in for that, and we will see you next time.
Yeah.